What if the Soviet T-34, one of the most feared tanks of World War II, had a hunter built specifically to stalk it from the shadows? Not a heavy tank, not a giant tank destroyer, but an 8-wheeled German armored car so fast, so quiet, and so over-engineered that it could strike, reverse at full speed, and vanish before a turret could even turn. This was the Sd.Kfz 2 Puma, a machine built around speed, precision, and one dangerous secret. Stay with us, because by the end, you may never look at armored warfare the same way again. Subscribe. Monocoque hull. German tank crews on the Eastern Front faced a recurring nightmare, the Soviet T-34. It possessed the perfect mix of sloped armor, wide tracks, and a devastating gun that easily crushed standard reconnaissance units. To hunt this beast, Germany needed a vehicle that could scout deep, strike hard, and vanish before the enemy could rotate their turrets. They built the Puma, an 8-wheeled predator that inverted every traditional rule of armored warfare. The core of its lethality did not come from thick steel, but from a radical structural secret hidden right beneath its paint. Traditional combat vehicles are built like a heavy truck, Honda, placing a soft metal cabin on top of a massive steel frame. The Puma threw that entire philosophy into the scrap heap by utilizing a cutting-edge monocoque hull. German engineers welded face-hardened steel plates, measuring 1.18 inch at the front nose and 0, Honda, 35 inch along the flanks, into a single, rigid, self-supporting box. This meant the outer armor itself acted as the vehicle's structural spine, completely eliminating the dead weight of an internal chassis. They slashed the total weight down to a razor-thin 7 metric tons, transforming the vehicle into a ghost on the battlefield. This weight reduction was the ultimate key advantage when operating in T-34 territory. A standard armored car hitting a muddy ditch would slam brute kinetic force into its frame joints, Honda, snapping the chassis and leaving the crew as sitting ducks. The Puma's monocoque design distributed those violent impacts evenly across its entire body, creating extreme stiffness for its weight. It could absorb the brutal recoil of a high-velocity gun and sprint across collapsing bridges where a T-34 would break the infrastructure. Modern engineering recognized this exact breakthrough decades later, using this identical structural DNA to build the U.S. Army's Stryker combat vehicle. The T-34 heavily relied on its wide tracks to float over the treacherous Soviet mud. However, those tracks came with a massive tactical cost. High mechanical friction, constant maintenance, and a loud acoustic signature that warned enemies miles away. The Puma bypassed these limitations entirely by marrying its lightweight frame with a high-performance wheeled setup. This was a brilliant engineering move. Lower weight meant lower ground pressure per wheel, allowing the vehicle to skim over soft topsoil that usually swallowed wheeled cars whole. It was quiet, fast, and remarkably agile. By stripping away the useless internal frame, designers freed up crucial internal volume for the crew and fuel storage. Scouts could operate inside a relatively spacious environment, reducing fatigue during grueling 48-hour reconnaissance operations behind enemy lines. More space also allowed for specialized radio gear, turning each Puma into a mobile command post that could call in Stuka dive bombers before the T-34 crews even realized they were being watched. It was more than a vehicle. It became a true predator designed to exploit every flaw in Soviet armored doctrine. 8x8 all-wheel drive bot, independent suspension, and dual steerings. Spotting a Soviet ambush on the Eastern Front usually meant a death sentence for a reconnaissance crew, Honda. Narrow dirt roads flanked by dense forests left zero room to execute a multi-point turn. If you tried to turn a standard 22.3-foot-long vehicle around under fire, Soviet anti-tank gunners would pick you apart before you finished the maneuver. Honda. The Puma bypassed this fatal bottleneck entirely through an over-engineered mechanical masterpiece. It utilized a dual steering configuration with two completely independent driving positions facing opposite directions inside the hull. The transmission setup was an advanced mechanical solution. A synchronized gearbox provided 6 forward and 6 reverse gears, but German engineers integrated a secondary reversing loop into the transfer case. This multiplied the gear ratios, resulting in a staggering 24 forward speeds and 24 reverse speeds. The moment an ambush was sprung, the rear-facing driver took instant control of the steering wheel. No turning around was necessary. The Puma could sprint backward into cover at its absolute maximum speed of 56 miles per hour, applying the full torque of all 24 gears in reverse. This immense flexibility relied on a relentless 8x8 all-wheel drive system paired with fully independent leaf spring suspension for every single wheel. Power was dynamically managed across all 8 tire positions through automatic locking differentials. If a landmine or a close artillery blast tore away 1 or 2 wheels entirely, the vehicle didn't stop. The remaining 6 wheels instantly absorbed the displaced torque, clawing the lightweight vehicle out of the kill zone. It turned catastrophic damage into a minor inconvenience. On the wider operational map, this complex drivetrain translated into pure tactical dominance against Soviet armor. The Puma routinely crossed ditches up to 656 foot wide, climbed steep 30-degree inclines, and waded through rivers up to 3.94 foot deep. On rough terrain, it sustained high speeds that left track T-34 units struggling to catch up. Elite reconnaissance units utilized this extreme mobility for devastating hit-and-run harassment campaigns. They would pop over a ridge, map out enemy troop movements, punch through thin flank armor, and vanish into the dust before a single Soviet tank could effectively engage them. When deployment shifted to Normandy in 1944, Allied forces ran into the exact same frustration. The dense French hedgerows and sunken lanes were notorious for trapping wheeled vehicles. Yet the Puma used its multi-wheel steering to snake through tight gaps that bogged down heavier Allied tanks. It constantly flanked Allied scouting parties, ambushing light armored cars like the M8 Greyhound with brutal efficiency. By the time American or British armor brought their main guns to bear, the rear driver had already engaged the reverse loop. The Puma was gone, leaving nothing behind but tire tracks and burning wreckage. Discreed now for more forgotten WW2 weapons. Join us for the next hidden battlefield story. The Tatra 103 air-cooled diesels. German industrial design during World War II had a notorious obsession with liquid-cooled Maybach gasoline engines. These high-strung, precise power plants ran beautifully on paved European test tracks, but struggled under the brutal realities of global combat. When building the Puma, engineers threw out the standard playbook and turned to Czechoslovakia's Tatra factory. They selected the Tatra 103, a massive 14.8-liter V12 diesel engine churning out up to 220 horsepower. A smart choice by designers, however, was not the raw cylinder count. It was the complete lack of a liquid radiator. By utilizing direct air cooling through high-velocity internal fans, the Puma eliminated the most fragile component of any combat vehicle. A single rogue piece of shrapnel or a stray machine gun bullet piercing a standard radiator bleeds the coolant dry, seizing the engine and turning the vehicle into a lightweight metal coffin within minutes. The Puma didn't care about shrapnel puncturing its cooling system because there was no liquid to lose. Furthermore, this air-cooled setup completely bypassed environmental extremes. It could not freeze solid during the brutal negative 40-degree Fahrenheit Russian winters, nor could it boil over in the scorching heat of North Africa. Choosing diesel over gasoline gave the Puma an unparalleled logistical edge over the fuel-hungry T-34. Gasoline vaporizes easily and ignites with a single spark, meaning a side penetration often resulted in an instant catastrophic fireball that incinerated the crew. Diesel fuel requires intense pressure and heat to ignite, dramatically increasing crew survival rates during a hull breach. More importantly, this engine achieved a power-to-weight ratio of about 18 horsepower per ton. This mechanical efficiency unlocked an astronomical operational range of 620 miles on highways and 370 miles cross-country. To put that tactical endurance into perspective, a Puma crew could self-deploy from Berlin to Paris on a single fill-up without a single fuel truck following them. While Soviet T-34 units were constantly tethered to vulnerable logistical supply chains, the Puma operated completely unchained. It was the ultimate asset for deep reconnaissance, lingering behind enemy lines for days at a time to spot troop concentrations. They would sit silently in the brush, engines idling reliably on minimal fuel, acting as invisible eyes for the panzer divisions. The 50mm Bouquet 39-1L60, a common mistake among military buffs, is judging a vehicle's lethality purely by the size of its caliber. On paper, the Puma's 50mm main gun looks completely inadequate compared to the heavy field pieces deployed later in the war. This weapon was originally developed for the cancelled Leopard light tank project, meaning it had to pack massive punching power into a restricted space. The secret to its lethality was the L60 designation, meaning the barrel length was 60 times the diameter of the bore, stretching to an impressive 9.84 foot. To prevent this long barrel from ripping the lightweight turret off its mount during firing, engineers integrated a multi-tiered muzzle brake at the tip. The internal mechanics of this weapon operated with clockwork German precision. It utilized an electrical firing ignition system and a semi-automatic breech block. This allowed a veteran loader to slam shells into the chamber at a blistering rate. Inside the compact turret, crews stored 55 rounds of ammunition, meticulously divided between armor-piercing and high-explosive shells. When firing standard armor-piercing ammunition, that elongated 9.84-foot barrel generated a hypervelocity muzzle blast. At a distance of 3,280 foot, it generated more than enough kinetic energy to completely shred any enemy reconnaissance vehicle it encountered. The real danger to Soviet armor, however, manifested when the Puma closed the distance to under 1,640 foot. At this medium range, the high-velocity 50mm round became a genuine giant killer against the flanking positions of medium tanks. The Soviet T-34 was famous for its sloped frontal protection, but its side and rear armor plates remained relatively thin at just 1.77 inch. If a Puma crew managed to secure a clean, flat angle against the side of a T-34 hull, the high-velocity round would cleanly punch through the steel. It was a precision scalpel capable of detonating the enemy's internal ammunition racks. This capability transformed the Puma from a passive scout into an aggressive predator on the battlefield. It was never intended to act as a frontline tank destroyer like its later sibling, the 234-4 variant equipped with the massive PaK-40. Instead, it was an incredibly lethal insurance policy operated by veteran crews from elite formations like the Panzer Lehr and the 2nd Panzer Division. These experienced hunters used the vehicle's speed to stalk T-34 formations from the flanks. They would fire a rapid succession of high-velocity rounds into the enemy's weak spots, then break contact before the slow Soviet turrets could even rotate toward the threat. Superior speed and mobility. True tactical mobility on the Eastern Front was defined by how effectively a vehicle could dictate the terms of engagement. The Puma achieved its legendary agility through the perfect synergy between its heavy-duty Tatra V12 powerplant and 8 massive, low-pressure combat tires. On paved roads and hard-packed surfaces, this engineering combination propelled the vehicle to a scorching top speed of 56 miles per hour. When transitioning to rugged, broken terrain, its independent suspension absorbed shocks smoothly. This allowed the vehicle to maintain a high cruising speed without disrupting the delicate balance of its internal turret gun cradle. Pitting a Puma against a T-34 was a direct clash between two entirely different philosophies of movement. The Soviet T-34 utilized wide Christie tracks to dominate heavy waterlogged mud during the infamous Rasputitsa season. However, those tracks made the Soviet tank sluggish on roads and forced its engine to consume an astronomical amount of fuel per mile. The Puma reversed this situation completely by exploiting Europe's extensive road networks for rapid, long-range operational maneuvers. Its supreme hidden advantage was the absolute freedom to choose the exact time, place, and conditions of the battle. The Puma used its speed to stretch Soviet formations thin, continually shifting its scouting positions to exploit exposed flanks. When encountering a T-34 unit, the ultimate rule for a Puma commander was to completely avoid a static frontal artillery duel. Instead, crews utilized their superior acceleration to rapidly close the distance and infiltrate the massive blind spots of the Soviet tank. A Puma would sprint into a dead zone, punch a high-velocity round straight into the T-34's drive sprocket or rear engine deck, and immediately break contact. By the time the Soviet 76mm or 85mm main gun could pull a proper lead on the target, the Puma had already utilized its extreme acceleration to escape the kill zone. It was a masterclass in asymmetric warfare, proving that speed and positioning could easily neutralize raw armor plating. Says Scudver today, and keep exploring the weapons history they never taught you. Production and supply bottlenecks. One harsh reality of military history is that the most brilliant engineering blueprints often collapse under the weight of industrial exhaustion. The Puma's production run was remarkably short-lived, lasting precisely 1 year from September 1943 to September 1944. When the assembly lines ground to a halt, only a meager 101 units of the Sd.Kfz 234-2 variant had been completed. The fatal blow to its operational lifespan did not happen on the battlefield, but deep within Germany's disintegrating supply chains. Allied strategic bombing and blockade networks cut off access to critical raw materials, most notably tungsten. Without this ultra-dense metal, German factories could no longer manufacture the specialized sub-caliber ammunition required to keep the high-velocity 50mm gun effective against heavier armor. This microscopic production total of 101 vehicles was not a failure of design, but a direct consequence of a massive logistical and doctrinal crisis. By 1944, the Soviet Red Army was flooding the Eastern Front with the upgraded T-34-85, which featured a reinforced 3.54-inch thick cast turret and a devastating 85mm main gun. The Puma's armed reconnaissance role was pushed to its absolute breaking point as the targets it hunted grew increasingly impervious to medium-caliber fire. Furthermore, manufacturing an 8-wheel drive vehicle with independent suspension, multi-wheel steering, and dual symmetric driver stations was an immense mechanical luxury. It required thousands of skilled man-hours and high-grade alloy steels at a time when Allied bombers were reducing German industrial centers to rubble. Despite these severe supply bottlenecks, the German High Command fully recognized the vehicle's unparalleled combat value. They fiercely rationed the precious 101 units, prioritizing their delivery exclusively to elite armored reconnaissance detachments, the Panzeraufklärungsabteilung. Elite divisions received a strict allocation of 19 to 25 Pumas per company, ensuring that these high-tier assets were operated only by the most experienced veterans. While this tiny fleet could never hope to alter the strategic outcome of the war, its tactical impact left an undeniable mark on history. The Puma became an engineering blueprint for the future. It seamlessly bridged the gap between high-speed reconnaissance and lethal anti-tank firepower, directly inspiring modern military giants like the French AMX-10RC, the Italian Centauro, and the U.S. Army's Stryker combat vehicle family generations later. If this deep dive breakdown changed the way you look at armored warfare, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more authentic World War II tactical breakdowns. Your support keeps these historical investigations going. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next sector.